How is the quality of the TV?
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. It really is.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now.
It was us. It was. We've landed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where were you when you...
I was 14, so I was at home. The actual Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin coming out of the capsule happens about 3 o'clock in the morning. And
You're
my
making me
parents-
emotional actually talking about
My
this.
parents let me start to watch it. It was...
And this is the thing about Apollo, and it's the first complex endeavour of its type where really, genuinely, no one in real time could see all the moving parts. And so you have to defer authority to people who are often very junior for critical decisions. But the thing that Armstrong was feared the most was that the computer would fall apart because they couldn't land on the moon without the computer. The mythology of Apollo is that the computer was rubbish and it crashed and Armstrong switched it off and went manual and flew it to the surface of the moon like it was a space-age tiger moth. But it's not true. It's not true. The computer was in the loop the whole time. Armstrong disabled parts of it and took part of manual control, but mostly he was on the computer all the way. So if the computer went down, they were all going to die. And as they're coming down, their rudimentary computer display flashes up this number 1202, and they've got no idea what that is. Armstrong doesn't know, Aldrin doesn't know, and they call it down. And in mission control, no one really knows what it is. And then they call it back to Bales, 26 years old. It's his responsibility. The flight director says, 1202, what's that? And so Bales now has the whole Armstrong, Aldrin, the entirety of mission control, the whole world looking at him for this decision on, do you land on the moon or do you abort at this point? And if he gets it wrong and he kills the astronauts, everyone's going to point at him. If he aborts when they could have landed, everyone's going to point at him.
Throttle down, 6 plus 25. Give us the reading on the 1202 program alarm. We're going that flight. We're going that alarm? Roger, we got you. If it doesn't reoccur, will we go? He's taking in a Delta H now. Roger.
And yet he goes back to his back room, shoots the problem, 15 seconds, returns with an answer, says you can carry on with the landing, and gets them onto the surface.
Is that 15 seconds of silence in mission control?
Well, there's never silence there, but there's a lot of chatter going backwards and forwards, and actually we could hear it all on the loops, so you can pick out all the loops are recorded. And he goes back to his back room, so out of sight there's a back, and there's a 23-year-old in the back room who also knows the alarms, and he says, I don't know, what do you think? And between them they work out that they can still proceed. But the 15 seconds is an eternity during this descent, because the thing is committed and falling, and it's falling towards the moon. And he says, it's like an eternity waiting for the response. And although you play it in real time and you hear Armstrong say, program alarm, and then there's silence. And then for the only time that anyone that we interviewed could ever remember, it's the only time anyone could remember Armstrong sounding slightly stressed, as he says, give me a reading on that program alarm.
They planted a plaque, right? We came in peace for all mankind. But we were talking earlier today about how that statement has aged, right? In the half century since. They were all white men from the prairies, in a way. Do you think, do you think that still stands for anything? Is it fair for Michael Collins to say, no, we really did?
I think this statement has aged and it hasn't. So first of all, it hasn't because what the Apollo astronauts achieved with the 500,000 people who worked behind the Apollo missions was something that was extraordinary. It was achieving this lifelong, or rather kind of millennial-long aim to reach for another world. There's definitely a feminist take on it. So it's really important to remember there were 500,000 people behind this project. And if today most of us will remember perhaps two names, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, if we are space geeks, we might remember more. If we are real space geeks, we might remember people like Gene Kranz and maybe even Werner von Braun, but we don't remember those 400,000 people, and certainly not the women behind this. So we have to kind of think about this as well. Who should be the next people going to the moon? Will it be a man, a woman, undefined gender? Jill Scott Heron's spoken word poem, he's going on about the fact that, you know, his sister, I can't remember the exact words, but he says something like, you know, my sister is in a flat with rats and she's been bitten by the rat, but who cares, Whitey's on the moon. I don't have money to pay my bills, but who cares, Whitey's on the moon. And he goes on like this, and he finishes by saying, you know, I don't really care about Whitey being on the moon. And the point that he's making here is that in the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was significant civil unrest in America. It was the middle of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, so had John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. America was still in an impasse in the Vietnam War. So this was a very complicated moment in American history. So yes, indeed, they landed on the moon for all of us. But also, there were people who were suffering from that endeavor because it was costing a huge amount of the American GDP.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that you look at that control room, and it is certainly monoculture and almost monogender. My personal experience of it is different because I was not alive, 69, but I was alive for some of the other landings. And the first thing I remember is 75 and the Apollo-Soyuz test project. You know, and my parents, who neither of whom my dad hadn't had a formal education, they were immigrants, they didn't speak English as a first language, but they kind of knew that they had to get their kids to embrace something that would propel them forwards. And the afterglow of Apollo for them was the appropriate vehicle. It was an idea that was big enough to talk about around the dinner table, even if you had no formal training in that. And so, Whitey on the moon or not, it was certainly what propelled me to go on and study astrophysics and then medicine and then work for NASA. So I feel exactly the sentiment. I understand the sentiment expressed in that poem, but actually I think afterwards it became something that was much broader and much more inclusive than the actual operation was.
As a way of improving society, as a way of getting somewhere with society, space travel's not the answer. We're never going to actually live in space. It's never going to be the answer. There's many better ways we can actually improve where the Earth is, where the Earth's going, and the lot of the people on the Earth, and how the Earth is going to be in it for the next 200 years. So, no, I think it was a fabulous thing to have done, but I think it happened because of the Cold War.
If I genuinely thought if we abandoned human space exploration, all of those dollars would then go into schools and hospitals, I would be out there saying no more space exploration, none. But it wouldn't. It would go into building another aircraft carrier. It would go into something. That's the first thing. Second thing is you could top slice the American military budget by about 5% and save the same amount of money that you do in all of space exploration full stop in the United States, not just space exploration. That's the second. The third thing, and I think for me the most important thing, and I have a different opinion of space exploration than I do space colonization. I agree with you on space colonization, but space exploration, I think, is something that is worth pursuing because all exploration is worth pursuing. And I say that because, this is 2019? If we were sitting here 100 years ago in 1919, we might be talking about Scott and Amundsen, and we would rightly say, what's the point? What's the point of exploring Antarctica? We're never going to live there, and we, by the way, no one ever settled it, so we never did. And it costs a godload of money to go there. And by the way, it's a 50% mortality. Scott's team entirely died. So what's the point? What's the point? And yet 50 years later, we put in scores of research teams, and they pull out the ice cores that show us that the paleoatmospheres of the Earth had a direct correlation between the levels of carbon dioxide and the temperature, the global temperature of the Earth. And it was that which it was part of that information that allowed us to build the case for understanding what we're doing to the Earth today. So the exploration of Antarctica, which at first glance looks expensive, dangerous, and lethal, later, 50 years later, yields knowledge that we could never have anticipated that literally has the potential to save the planet.